Have you ever had your heart shattered into a million pieces? Imagine the person who broke you didn't just walk away. He sent you an invitation to watch him marry someone better. That's exactly what happened to Arya. Her ex-fiancé wanted to humiliate her, to show her she wasn't enough for his new high-flying life. He expected her to crumble, but he didn't count on one thing. Arya wasn't coming alone, and she definitely wasn't coming single. This is a story about revenge, ambition, and the kind of love that blindsides you when you least expect it. Grab your tissues and get comfortable. This is The Billionaire's Counterfeit Wife. The envelope was heavy, the kind of cream-colored cardstock that whispered money before you even touched it. It sat on the scarred laminate table of Arya Quinn's mother's kitchen, looking entirely out of place amidst the pile of overdue utility bills and grocery circulars. To Arya, it didn't look like mail. It looked like a weapon. Her fingers, rough from weeks of washing dishes and scrubbing espresso machine portafilters, trembled as she broke the wax seal. It was a custom crest. Of course it was. Mason Cole didn't do things by halves. He didn't just climb the corporate ladder. He sprinted up it, kicking people in the face as he went. Inside, the calligraphy was a masterpiece of understated elegance, announcing the union of Mason Cole and Vanessa van der Hoven. The names looked perfect together, symmetrical and elite. Vanessa was the daughter of a Manhattan real estate titan. Arya was currently an unemployed interior architect working as a barista to pay off her student loans. But it wasn't the invitation that made the air leave Arya's lungs in a painful rush. It was the smaller note tucked behind the RSVP card. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, instantly recognizable. Arya, it's important to me that you see I've finally found my equal. Closure is good for everyone. Hope you can make it. M. Found my equal. The words were a physical blow. 2 months ago, standing in the hallway of the apartment they had shared in Brooklyn, Mason had ended their 3-year engagement not with a shout, but with a cold, terrifying rationality. "You're a sweet girl, Arya," he had said, adjusting his silk tie in the mirror while she cried. "But let's be real. You're stagnant. I'm going places where you just don't fit. I need a partner who elevates my brand, not one I have to explain." He had dismantled her future with the efficiency of a corporate merger. He kept the apartment. She got the heartbreak. She had retreated to her mother's cramped walk-up in Queens, taking a shift lead position at The Grind, a chaotic coffee shop in the financial district, just to feel useful, just to survive. "He wants me to watch," Arya whispered to the empty kitchen, her voice cracking. "He wants an audience for his victory lap." The next morning, the financial district was a grey wash of rain and aggressive pedestrians. Inside The Grind, the humidity was 90%, smelling of burnt beans and wet wool. Arya moved through her shift in a fugue state. The roar of the milk steamers sounded like they were underwater. Every time the door chimed, she flinched, half expecting to see Mason's smug face, though he worked 10 blocks away at Cole & Co. The invitation burned a hole in her apron pocket. "Found my equal." The phrase was on a loop in her mind, a mantra of her own inadequacy. "Order for table 4. Her manager, hysterical as always, barked from the pass. Arya grabbed the tray. It was loaded, 3 ceramic mugs of scalding Americano and a pitcher of oat milk. She turned, her pivot foot slipping on a stray coffee bean on the tile floor. It happened in slow motion. The world tilted on its axis. Arya flailed, trying to correct her balance, but gravity was unforgiving. The tray launched from her hand. The mugs went airborne, turning over in a dark, liquid arc. "No!" she gasped. The hot coffee splashed down with a horrific hiss, landing directly onto the chest of a man sitting in the corner booth. The entire cafe went silent. Arya froze, her hands hovering over her mouth. The man was a statue. He was wearing a white dress shirt that probably cost more than her mother's car, and now it was dyed a deep, ruinous brown. The liquid dripped from his lapel onto the table, where a tablet displayed complex stock analytics. Mortification, hot and absolute, washed over her. This was it. This was rock bottom. First Mason, now this. She was going to be fired. She was going to be sued. "Oh my God," she stammered, rushing forward, grabbing a fistful of coarse brown napkins. "Sir, I am so sorry. I slipped. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. I'll pay for the shirt." She dabbed uselessly at his chest, her hands shaking so hard she was making it worse. She braced herself for the shouting. The financial district guys were the worst. Entitled, loud, litigious. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the impact. "It's okay." The voice was low, a baritone rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It wasn't angry. It was tired. Arya opened her eyes. She knew him, not by name, but by routine. He came in every morning at 7 a.m. sharp. He ordered a black coffee, opened his tablet, and sat in absolute silence for 45 minutes. He never smiled, never flirted with the baristas, never took calls. He was an island of intense calm in the ocean of chaos. He had dark hair, slightly too long for a corporate cut, and eyes the color of steel, gray, sharp, and currently looking at her with a strange expression. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. "It looks like you're having a hell of a day," he said, peeling the wet fabric away from his skin. The simple, gentle observation broke something inside her. The dam she had built around her grief since Mason left finally cracked. Tears, hot and unbidden, spilled over her lashes. "You have no idea," she choked out. I can't do anything right. My fiancé left me for an heiress. My landlord is evicting my mum, and now I've scolded the only nice customer we have." The man paused, holding the ruin of his shirt. He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the dark circles under her hazel eyes, the fraying cuffs of her uniform, the sheer desperation radiating off her. He glanced at his ruined shirt, then back at her. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Tell you what," he said, standing up. He was tall, imposing, filling the space between the tables. "You're off in 10 minutes, right? Meet me outside. You owe me a shirt, but I'll settle for a conversation." "A conversation?" Arya sniffed, bewildered. "I need a distraction," he said, his eyes darkening with a shadow she couldn't interpret. "And judging by that look in your eye, you need an escape plan." The autumn air in Battery Park was crisp, carrying the brine of the harbor and the exhaust of the West Side Highway. Arya walked beside the stranger, hugging her coat tighter. He had changed into a spare blazer he'd had in his car, a sleek, black sedan with tinted windows that was currently idling near the park entrance, but the coffee stain was still visible on his collar. "I'm Arya," she said, breaking the silence, "and again, I am mortified." "Damien," he replied. He didn't offer a surname, he didn't need to. There was an authority in his stride that screamed power. "And don't worry about the shirt. It was Brioni. I hated the fit anyway." They sat on a bench overlooking the water. The Statue of Liberty was a green thumbprint in the distance. "So," Damien said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "The fiancée, the heiress. Talk." It should have been weird, spilling her guts to a stranger she had nearly boiled alive with Arabica beans, but Damien Hale had a way of listening that felt like a vacuum. He absorbed everything. So, Arya told him. She told him about Mason, about the 3 years she spent editing his resumes, designing his apartment, soothing his ego. She told him about the invitation. He wants me to see he's moved on, she said, bitterness coating her tongue. He wants to prove I was just a stepping stone. Damien remained silent for a long time, watching the ferry cut through the grey water. Ambition is a rot, he said finally. When it's the only thing you feed on, it eats you from the inside out. He turned to face her. The wind caught his hair, and for a second, the stoic mask slipped. Arya saw exhaustion, bone-deep weariness. My father, Damien began, his voice dropping an octave, is Victor Hale. Arya gasped. Hale Global Holdings owned half the skyline. They were in shipping, tech, and luxury real estate. Victor Hale was known as the Shark of Wall Street. He's dying, Damien said flatly. Or so he says. He's threatening to step down and hand the CEO position to my cousin, Marcus, an idiot who would bankrupt the company in a month, unless I secure a specific merger. A merger? With the Mercier Group, French luxury goods, old money, powerful connections in Europe. Damien rubbed his temples. But Henri Mercier is a traditionalist. He doesn't trust a bachelor CEO. He thinks an unmarried man is unstable. My father has arranged a marriage between me and Isabella Mercier. If I don't marry her by the end of the fiscal quarter, I lose the company I built. I lose my life's work. Isabella Mercier? Arya blinked. I read about her. She's intense. She's a piranha in Chanel, Damien corrected. We despise each other, but my father and hers are adamant. He looked at Arya then, and the air between them shifted. The commiseration vanished, replaced by a spark of something dangerous, something reckless. So, Arya said, trying to lighten the mood, we're both trapped. I'm the discarded ex, and you're the corporate pawn. Trapped, Damien repeated. He looked at the coffee stain on his collar, then at Arya's invitation sticking out of her purse. A light flickered in his grey eyes, a look of pure, unadulterated mischief. It transformed his face, making him look 10 years younger. What if, he started, the words slow, testing the weight of them. What if we weren't? What do you mean? Your ex wants to humiliate you. He expects you to show up alone, sad, and defeated, or not show up at all, which is a forfeit. Damien turned his body toward her. And my father expects me to roll over and marry a woman I hate to secure a deal. He leaned in. The scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco hit her. Marry me, Arya. Arya let out a short, incredulous laugh. Excuse me? I'm serious. Marry me. Today. Tomorrow. As soon as possible. Damien's mind was visibly racing, calculating the angles. If I'm already married, the contract with the Merciers is void on the marriage clause, but they can't back out of the merger without a penalty fee because I didn't refuse the merger, I just became unavailable. My father can't force me to commit bigamy. You're insane, Arya whispered. You are literally insane. And you, Damien pressed on, ignoring her shock, need to go to that wedding. Imagine it, Arya. You don't walk in as the victim. You walk in as Mrs. Damien Hale, the wife of a billionaire. You arrive in a Bentley. You wear a dress that costs more than Mason's annual salary. You look him in the eye, happy, thriving, and powerful. He paused, letting the image bloom in her mind. You want to hurt him? Damien asked softly. Don't scream at him. Don't key his car. Outshine him. Make him realize that leaving you was the biggest financial and personal mistake of his life. The image was intoxicating. Mason's smug face crumbling. Vanessa van der Hoven wondering why the waitress was suddenly royalty. "It's a business arrangement," Damien clarified, his voice professional again. "1 year. I pay off your student loans. I buy your mother a house, fully paid for. You get a monthly stipend. In exchange, you play the part of the devoted wife. We attend galas, we smile for the press, and we survive the merger." Arya looked at the Statue of Liberty. She looked at her rough hands. She thought about the equal note. This man was offering her a sword to fight a dragon. "What happens after a year?" she asked. "We divorce quietly. Irreconcilable differences. You keep the money, I keep my company. We go our separate ways." Arya looked into Damien's eyes. She saw the desperation there, mirroring her own. He wasn't Predator. He was just another animal caught in a trap, willing to chew his own leg off to get free. Or in this case, marry a stranger. She took a deep breath, inhaling the cold river air. "My mother wants a garden," Arya said. "A house with a real garden in Queens." Damien smiled, and this time it was genuine. It reached his eyes. "Done. She can have a greenhouse if she wants." Arya extended her hand. "Okay, Damien Hale, let's get married." The city clerk's office on Worth Street was a purgatory of fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors. It smelled of stale bureaucracy. It was the antithesis of romance, which made it the perfect setting for their transaction. Arya signed her name on the marriage license with a steady hand. Arya Quinn. Damien signed next to her with a sharp, angular scrawl. "I do," she said to the board clerk. "I do," Damien echoed. There were no vows, no poetry, just a stamp and a filing fee. When they stepped back out onto the sidewalk, the sun was fighting through the clouds. Damien checked his watch. Step 1 complete. Step 2, armor. Armor? The wedding is in the Hamptons this weekend, correct? Saturday, Arya confirmed, at the Cole estate. Then we have 48 hours to turn you into the kind of woman who makes empires tremble. He drove them uptown, leaving the gritty reality of the clerk's office for the polished fantasy of Madison Avenue. He pulled up in front of a boutique that didn't have a sign, just a frosted glass door and a security guard who nodded at Damien with deference. "This is L'Atelier," Damien explained as they entered. "It's where my mother shops. It's where Isabella shops. We need something that says you didn't just survive the breakup. You transcended it." The interior was silent and smelled of lavender and money. A stylist named Celeste, a woman with silver hair and impeccable posture, glided over. "Mr. Hale," she purred, kissing both his cheeks. "We weren't expecting you. And who is this delightful creature?" "This is my wife, Arya," Damien said. The word wife hung in the air, strange and heavy. Even Damien seemed to stumble over it slightly. "We need a dress for a wedding in the Hamptons. Black tie. Hostile territory." Celeste's eyes lit up. Hostile territory, my favorite category. For the next 2 hours, Arya was a doll. She was poked, prodded, and draped in silks and chiffons. "Too soft," Damien said, dismissing a pale pink tulle from his leather armchair. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was watching the process with the intensity of a hawk. "That makes her look innocent. We don't want innocent. We want dangerous." "Too structural," he critiqued a black architectural piece. "She's not a building." Arya was growing tired. She stood in the dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror. Her hair was messy, her makeup was faded. "Who am I kidding?" she thought. "I'm playing dress-up. Mason is going to see right through this." "I have one," Celeste whispered from behind the curtain. "It arrived from Milan yesterday. It was intended for a runway in Paris, but I think it wants you." She slid a garment bag open. The fabric was a deep, impossible red. Not bright cherry, but the color of oxygenated blood, of crushed rubies. It was velvet and silk, designed to cling to every curve before cascading into a dramatic train. The neckline was a plunging V that was daring but elegant, framed by long, sheer sleeves. Arya stepped into it. The silk lining felt like cool water against her skin. She zipped it up. She turned to the mirror and gasped. The dress didn't just fit, it conspired with her body. It made her stand taller. It highlighted the arch of her neck, the narrowness of her waist. It was bold. It was loud. It was a declaration of war. She stepped out of the dressing room. Damien was pouring himself a glass of sparkling water. He looked up, distracted. "Celeste, if the red one isn't right, maybe we try the—" He stopped. The glass slipped from his fingers, bouncing on the thick carpet with a muffled thud. Fortunately, it didn't break, but Damien didn't seem to notice. He stood up slowly. His eyes, usually so analytical, so cold, widened. He swept his gaze from her hemline up to her face, and for the first time since they met, he looked struck, dumbfounded. "Arya," he breathed. It wasn't the businesslike tone he used for negotiations. It was rougher. He walked toward her, stopping just shy of touching her. "Is it too much?" Arya asked, suddenly shy under his intense scrutiny. "Is it too red?" "It's lethal," Damien whispered. He circled her, his eyes tracing the line of her back. "Mason Cole is going to have a heart attack before he even says, 'I do.'" He stopped in front of her again, his gray eyes locking onto her hazel ones. The air in the boutique seemed to thin. The transactional nature of their relationship wobbled, threatened by the sudden visceral attraction radiating from him. "You look," he struggled for the word, "you look like a queen." He cleared his throat, stepping back, reassembling his mask. "We'll take it, and the shoes, and whatever jewelry Celeste recommends. Send the bill to the office." As they walked out, Damien held the door for her, but as she passed, he placed a hand on the small of her back. The touch was electric. It burned through the fabric of her old coat. "Ready for the performance of a lifetime, Mrs. Hale?" he murmured against her ear. Arya looked at the reflection in the shop window. She saw the man beside her, powerful, handsome, dangerous. She saw herself, chin up, eyes blazing. "Let's burn the place down," she said. The drive to the Hamptons was a 2-hour lesson in silence and horsepower. Damien drove the Bentley Continental GT himself, dismissing his usual driver. He drove with a casual, fluid competence, one hand resting lightly on the leather-wrapped steering wheel, the other occasionally adjusting the climate control to ensure Arya didn't freeze in her silk gown. Arya stared out the window as the landscape shifted from the concrete claustrophobia of the city to the manicured, exclusive greenery of Long Island. Her heart was a trapped bird, battering against her ribs. "Breathe," Damien said, his eyes still on the road. "You're hyperventilating. It's bad for the velvet." "I can't do this," Arya whispered, her hands clutching the sleek clutch bag Damien had bought her, a Judith Lieber piece that cost more than her entire student loan balance. "I'm a fraud, Damien. I'm a barista. Last week I cried because I dropped a croissant. Now I'm supposed to walk into the Cole estate and pretend I own the place?" Damien slowed the car as they approached the massive iron gates of the estate. He turned to her, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. "You're not pretending to own the place, Arya," he said, his voice low and devoid of mockery. "You are Mrs. Damien Hale. In the hierarchy of this world, you could buy the Cole estate, demolish it, and build a parking lot just to make a point. Remember that." He reached over and took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and shockingly grounding. You aren't the girl he dumped anymore. You're the woman he couldn't afford. The gates swung open. The Cole estate was exactly as Arya remembered Mason describing it. Ostentatious. It was a sprawling neo-Georgian mansion that screamed new money, trying desperately to look old. The driveway was lined with imported Italian cypress trees that looked miserable in the New York climate. Cars were queuing up at the valet. Porsches, Maseratis, a few Rolls-Royces. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the distinct, crisp smell of ocean money. As the Bentley purred to a stop, a hush seemed to fall over the immediate vicinity. The valet rushed to open Damien's door, his eyes widening as he recognized the driver. "Mr. Hale," the valet stammered. We weren't aware you were on the guest list, sir. Welcome." Damien ignored him, tossing the keys with a negligent flick of his wrist. He walked around the car to the passenger side. He didn't wait for the valet. He opened the door himself. He extended a hand into the darkened interior. Arya took a deep breath. She thought of the equal note. She thought of her mother's eviction notice. She took his hand. When she stepped out, the reaction was instantaneous. The late afternoon sun caught the deep, blood-red velvet of her dress, making it glow against the sea of pastel chiffons and beige linens that the other guests were wearing. The dress was a violation of the unspoken rule to blend in. It was a scream of color in a whisper of a world. The slit in the skirt revealed a flash of leg and the diamond-encrusted stilettos that elevated her 3 inches closer to the sky. A photographer, hired to capture the candid moments of the elite, instinctively turned his lens toward them. The shutter clicked rapidly. Chick-chick-chick-chick. "Who is that?" a woman in lavender whispered loudly nearby. Is that the ex?" another voice murmured, sounding scandalized. "No, it can't be. She looks expensive," her companion finished. Arya felt her knees tremble, but Damien stepped in close, sliding his arm around her waist. His touch wasn't tentative, it was possessive. He pulled her against his side, creating a solid wall of heat and strength. "Chin up," he murmured, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. To the onlookers, it looked like an intimate secret between lovers. "Walk like you're bored. Nothing terrifies these people more than indifference." They moved toward the grand entrance. The crowd parted. It wasn't just the dress or Damien's fame, it was the energy radiating off them. They moved with a unified, predatory grace. Arya channeled every ounce of anger she had stored up over the last 2 months and poured it into her posture. She didn't look at the ground, she looked straight ahead, her face a mask of cool, serene beauty. They were a comet streaking through a garden party. As they reached the top of the stone steps, the wedding planner, a frantic woman with a headset, tried to check her clipboard. "Name, please." "Hale," Damien said, not breaking stride. The woman froze. Her pen hovered over the list. "Mr. Damien Hale. I don't see—" "We're a late addition," Damien said smoothly, breezing past her before she could object. "I'm sure Mason won't mind. We're old friends." They stepped into the reception hall. It was a cavernous ballroom dripping with crystals and white roses. Hundreds of guests were mingling, sipping champagne. And there, in the center of the room, standing under a massive floral archway, was Mason. He looked handsome, Arya had to admit. He was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo, his blonde hair perfectly coiffed. He was laughing at something a business associate was saying, his head thrown back in that practiced, charming way he had. Next to him was Vanessa van der Hoven, looking petite and perfectly appropriate in a lace Vera Wang that probably cost a fortune. but looked entirely forgettable. Mason's laughter died instantly when his eyes swept the room and landed on the entrance. He froze. The champagne flute in his hand tilted dangerously. His jaw actually dropped. He stared at Arya, blinking rapidly as if his brain refused to process the visual data. He looked from her face, down the cascading red velvet, to the hand resting possessively on her waist, and finally up to the man attached to that hand. Recognition dawned on his face, followed immediately by a pallor that made him look like he'd seen a ghost. "Showtime," Damien whispered. Mason didn't just walk toward them. He marched. It was an aggressive, panicked stride, the walk of a man losing control of his carefully curated narrative. He abandoned his bride mid-sentence, leaving Vanessa blinking in confusion at the floral arrangement. The murmur in the room grew louder as guests realized the groom was storming toward the late arrivals. The tension was palpable, a physical static in the air. "Arya," Mason hissed when he was 10 feet away, his voice a strangled mix of fury and disbelief. He stopped just short of them, his eyes darting around to see who was watching. "What the hell are you doing here?" Arya felt a spike of old fear, the reflex to apologize, to shrink, to make herself small so he wouldn't be annoyed. But then she felt Damien's thumb stroke the silk covering her hip. A small, rhythmic motion. "I'm here," it said. "You're safe." She stood her ground. "You sent me an invitation, Mason. Remember? You wanted me to see you'd moved on." Mason's face flushed a blotchy red. "I sent that to... I didn't think you'd actually show up, and certainly not dress like..." He gestured vaguely at her, his eyes raking over the dress with a mixture of lust and scorn. "Like a Vegas showgirl." "Careful," Damien said. The word was soft, but it carried the distinct crack of a whip. Mason's head snapped toward Damien. He seemed to struggle with the cognitive dissonance of seeing Arya Quinn, the girl who clipped coupons, standing next to the CEO of Hale Global Holdings. "And who is this?" Mason sneered, trying to regain his footing by going on the offensive. He looked Damien up and down, feigning ignorance. "Did you hire an escort for the evening, Arya? That's pathetic, even for you. Spent your last paycheck renting a suit to make me jealous?" The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. Arya opened her mouth to retort, but Damien laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. "You think I'm for rent?" Damien asked, amused. He stepped forward, forcing Mason to take a stumbling step back. The height difference wasn't huge, but the power difference was astronomical. "I'm afraid my hourly rate is a little outside of anyone's budget, Cole, especially yours." Mason bristled. "I know who you are, Hale. I just don't know what you're doing with her. Did she spill coffee on you, and you took pity on the help?" It was too close to the truth, and it stung. Arya flinched. Damien's eyes went cold. The grey steel turned to ice. He shifted his stance, placing himself slightly in front of Arya, shielding her not just physically, but symbolically. "I think you're confused," Damien said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, conversational volume that forced the nearby eavesdroppers to lean in. "You seem to be under the impression that Arya is pining for you, that she's broken." Damien reached out and took Arya's left hand. He lifted it. The ballroom lights caught the platinum band. Simple, elegant, and unmistakably permanent. "But the truth is, Mason," Damien continued, savoring the name like a bad taste, "I have to thank you. If you hadn't been foolish enough to let a woman of this caliber go, I never would have had the chance to make her my wife." The word detonated in the room. Wife. Mason stared at the ring. His eyes bulged. "Wife? You're married?" Just yesterday, Damien lied smoothly, dropping Arya's hand but keeping his arm around her. We wanted something private, intimate, unlike this circus. He gestured vaguely at the over-the-top decorations. You're lying, Mason spat, his voice rising, drawing more attention. She's a nobody. She's a barista. You married her? I married my equal, Damien said, turning Mason's own words against him with surgical precision. Actually, I married up. She's brilliant, resilient, and frankly, far too good for me. And she is definitely too good to be standing here, listening to the petty insults of a man who clearly hasn't moved on as much as he claims. Damien leaned in closer to Mason, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Mason and Arya could hear. If you ever speak to my wife with that tone again, Cole, I will buy your company, strip it for parts, and turn your office into a storage closet for my janitorial staff. Do we understand each other? Mason turned pale. He looked at Arya, searching for the girl he used to bully emotionally. The girl who would apologize for his outbursts. She wasn't there. In her place was a woman in red velvet who looked at him with nothing but cool, distant pity. Congratulations on the wedding, Mason, Arya said softly. She looks nice. Don't mess it up. With that, Damien turned them away, dismissing Mason as if he were a waiter who had brought the wrong order. Champagne, darling? Damien asked loudly enough for the press to hear. Please, Arya replied, her voice steady, though her heart was doing backflips. They walked toward the bar, leaving a stunned groom and a whispering crowd in their wake. The humiliation was absolute. Mason wasn't just upstaged, he was rendered irrelevant at his own wedding. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a shaky, light-headed feeling. Arya accepted the crystal flute of champagne Damien handed her, her fingers brushing his. You were terrifying, she whispered, taking a large gulp of the vintage Dom Perignon. I was accurate, Damien corrected, sipping his own drink. He scanned the room, his gaze protective. He's a small man with a big ego. They're the easiest to dismantle. The band, a 12-piece orchestra on a raised stage, transitioned from jazz standards to a slow, sweeping waltz. The lights dimmed, turning the ballroom into a twilight dreamscape of soft blues and purples. Couples began to drift toward the dance floor. Damien set his glass down on a high-top table. He turned to Arya and extended his hand, bowing slightly at the waist. It was an old-world gesture, courtly and formal, yet his eyes held that same spark of mischief. Mrs. Hale, he said, we need to sell the romance. The press is watching. Mason is watching. I don't know if I can dance, Arya confessed, looking at his hand. My legs feel like jelly. I'll hold you up, he promised. She took his hand. He led her onto the floor, navigating through the other couples until they were in the center, directly under the massive chandelier. He turned her into his arms. This wasn't like the quick, functional touching they had done so far. This was intimacy. He placed one hand firmly on her waist, his fingers splaying over the velvet, claiming her. His other hand clasped hers, lifting it to shoulder height. He pulled her in until their bodies were flush against each other. Arya gasped softly. She could feel the heat of him through his tuxedo and her silk dress. She could feel the solid wall of his chest. She could smell the sandalwood and something else, something clean and masculine that made her head spin. They began to move. Damien was an excellent dancer. He led with subtle pressure, guiding her effortlessly through the turns. Arya followed, her body instinctively responding to his. For a moment, the room fell away. The whispers, the stares, Mason's angry face in the distance. It all blurred into background noise. All that existed was the man holding her. "You're doing great," he murmured against her hair. His chin rested lightly on her temple. "I feel like I'm in a movie," Arya admitted, closing her eyes for a second. "A really stressful movie." "The stressful part is over," Damien said. His hand on her back moved slightly, his thumb rubbing a soothing circle against her spine. "Now comes the easy part. We just have to look like we're in love." Arya looked up at him. His face was inches from hers. She saw the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, the dark lashes, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. "Is it hard?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could filter it. "Pretending?" Damien looked down at her. His expression softened, the hard lines of his face relaxing. For a heartbeat, the mask didn't just slip, it dissolved. "No," he said, his voice rough. "It's surprisingly easy." The admission hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Arya's breath hitched. She became hyper-aware of everything. The warmth of his hand, the way his leg brushed between hers as they turned, the way he looked at her mouth. This was supposed to be a transaction, a business deal. But business partners didn't look at each other like they were the only water in a desert. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling, "for what you said to him, for giving me my dignity back." "He never took it, Arya," Damien said fiercely. "He just made you forget you had it." The song ended, the final notes hanging in the air. They stood there for a beat too long, neither willing to break the embrace. The applause of the guests startled them apart. They stepped back, the loss of contact feeling like a physical chill. "We should go," Damien said, his voice tight. He adjusted his cufflinks, suddenly unable to meet her eyes. "We've made our point. Staying longer borders on gloating." "Right," Arya nodded, smoothing her dress. "Let's go." They left the ballroom without saying goodbye to anyone. The exit was just as dramatic as the entrance, a sweep of red velvet and black tuxedo disappearing into the night. The valet brought the car around. They slid into the leather interior of the Bentley, the silence of the cabin wrapping around them like a cocoon. As they pulled away from the estate, leaving the lights and the noise behind, the atmosphere in the car was different. On the drive up, it had been awkward, tense, with nerves. Now, it was charged. It was the heavy, static-filled silence of two people who had just crossed a line and didn't know how to step back. Arya looked at Damien's profile as he drove, illuminated by the passing streetlights. He looked stoic, focused on the road, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She looked down at the platinum band on her finger. It felt heavy. It felt real. "So," she said, trying to break the tension, though her voice sounded breathless, "what happens now?" Damien didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead into the darkness of the highway. "Now," he said, "we go to my father's house, and we convince the scariest man in New York that this," he gestured between them, "is the love story of the century." Arya swallowed. The wedding was a skirmish. The war was just beginning. If the Cole wedding was a display of loud, insecure wealth, the Hale Manor in Greenwich was a monument to old, unshakable power. The mansion was a sprawling stone edifice that looked less like a home and more like a fortress designed to withstand a siege. Damien parked the Bentley in the circular driveway. The silence in the car, which had been charged with a strange electricity since the dance, now curdled into dread. "My parents aren't warm people," Damien warned, turning off the engine. "My father views emotion as a market inefficiency. My mother views it as a breach of etiquette. They will try to dissect you. Don't let them." "I survived Mason," Arya said, straightening her spine, though her stomach was doing somersaults. I can survive a dinner party. It's not a dinner party, Arya, Damien said, his hand resting on the door handle. It's a board meeting with silverware. They were ushered into the formal drawing room by a butler who looked like he had been carved out of mahogany. Victor Hale sat in a wingback chair by the fire, looking like a lion in winter, grey, scarred, and dangerous. Damien's mother, Beatrice, sat opposite him, sipping tea with a posture so rigid she looked breakable. They didn't stand when Damien and Arya entered. A wedding, Victor said. No greeting, no hello, just the accusation hanging in the air like cigar smoke. Good evening, Father, Damien said, his voice dropping into that cool, detached register he used for business. He guided Arya forward, his hand firm on the small of her back. Mother, I'd like you to meet my wife, Arya Hale. Beatrice set her teacup down. The china clinked loudly in the silence. She swept her gaze over Arya, taking in the red velvet dress, which now felt too loud, too dramatic for this somber room, and the simple platinum band. Arya, Beatrice said, testing the name like it might be poisonous. I wasn't aware we knew any Quinns from the right circles. Arya is an architect, Damien lied smoothly, inflating her credentials without hesitation. She's a visionary. We met organically. You had an agreement, Damien, Victor rumbled, his eyes narrowing. With the Merciers, Henri called me an hour ago. He heard rumors from the Hamptons. He is apoplectic. You have jeopardized a billion-dollar merger for… What? A whim? Not a whim, Damien countered, his jaw tightening. A choice. I decided that my personal life is not an asset you can trade to shore up your quarterly earnings. You are a CEO, Victor snapped, standing up. He was shorter than Damien, but possessed a terrifying gravity. You don't have a personal life. You have obligations. And now I have a wife, Damien said, stepping forward, effectively placing himself between his father and Arya. And the merger can still happen. The marriage clause was archaic. The business fundamentals remain sound. If Henry pulls out, it's his loss, not ours. Victor stared at his son, assessing him. For the first time, Arya saw a flicker of something that wasn't anger in the old man's eyes. It was surprise. Damien was defying him, not with a tantrum, but with a strategy. And you, Beatrice said, turning her laser focus to Arya, do you understand what you've married into, Miss Quinn? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a target on your back. Arya thought of the way Damien had defended her at the wedding. She thought of his hand on her back, steady and warm. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Hale, Arya said, her voice steady. And I don't scare easily, Victor grunted. We'll see. It's late. The roads are icing over. You'll stay the night. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command, a test. Of course, Damien said, his face impassive. We wouldn't dream of driving back tonight. The guest room, or rather Damien's old suite, was vast, decorated in shades of navy and charcoal. It was masculine, cold, and dominated by a massive four-poster bed. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut, Damien exhaled, leaning his forehead against the wood. The tension that had held him upright seemed to snap. I'm sorry about them, he muttered. They're charming, aren't they? They're intense, Arya admitted, kicking off her heels and sinking her toes into the plush rug. But you stood up to them. Damien turned around, loosening his tie. I had to. If they smell weakness, they attack. Which brings us to our current problem. He gestured to the bed. There was only one. I'll take the sofa, Damien said, immediately, moving toward the velvet settee by the window. It looked elegant, but painfully short. "Don't be ridiculous," Arya said. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and the adrenaline crash was hitting her hard. "Your mother probably has the staff monitoring the hallway. If the maid comes in with coffee in the morning and sees you on the sofa, the gig is up. They'll know it's a sham." Damien paused. "Arya, I'm not going to ask you to share a bed with a man you met yesterday. We're married, remember?" Arya gave him a tired smile. "It's a California king, Damien. You could park your Bentley in the middle of it and we'd still have room. Just stay on your side." Damien hesitated, then nodded. "Strictly for appearances." "Strictly." They got ready in shifts. Arya found a silk robe in the closet, likely left by a guest or his mother, and washed the makeup off her face. When she emerged from the bathroom, Damien was already in bed, wearing a t-shirt and boxers, reading a file on his tablet. He looked strikingly normal, domestic even. Arya climbed in on the other side, turning off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, save for the moonlight filtering through the curtains. She lay stiffly on the edge of the mattress, hyper-aware of him. She could hear his breathing. She could smell that sandalwood scent. The space between them felt charged, a no-man's land of unasked questions. "Good night, Mrs. Hale," he whispered into the dark. "Good night, Damien," she replied. She didn't expect to sleep, but the bed was comfortable, and the emotional toll of the day was heavy. She drifted off, her last thought being the strange sense of safety she felt knowing he was there. She woke up to warmth. It wasn't the stifling heat of her radiator in Queens. It was a solid, living warmth. Arya shifted, nuzzling her face into the comfortable surface against her cheek. It smelled like expensive soap and skin. Her eyes fluttered open. She wasn't on her side of the bed. At some point in the night, she had gravitated toward the center, and so had he. She was curled against Damien's chest. His arm was draped heavy and secure over her waist, pulling her flush against him. Her leg was tangled with his. He was fast asleep, his chin resting on the top of her head. For a moment, panic flared. This wasn't the deal. But it was immediately drowned out by a wave of comfort so profound it scared her. It felt right. It felt like she had been sleeping cold her whole life and finally found the fire. Damien shifted, his grip on her tightening reflexively as he woke. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her hair. Then he froze. Arya felt his heart rate pick up against her cheek. He pulled back slowly, and she lifted her head. They stared at each other in the gray morning light. Their faces were inches apart. His hair was messy, his eyes heavy with sleep. He looked vulnerable in a way the CEO of Hale Global Holdings never did. Damien started, his voice a morning rasp that sent a shiver down her spine. "I stayed on my side, I think." "Me too," Arya whispered, not moving away. The air between them was thick. The line between fake wife and real woman was blurring dangerously. His gaze dropped to her lips, then flicked back up to her eyes, wide and searching. A knock on the door shattered the moment. "Breakfast is served, sir," a muffled voice called out. They sprang apart like teenagers caught by a parent. Damien scrambled to his side, raking a hand through his hair. Arya pulled the duvet up to her chin, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Coming," Damien called out, his voice cracking slightly. He looked at Arya from across the expanse of the mattress. His ears were red. "We need to get back to the city," he said, breathless. Immediately. The drive back to Manhattan was faster. The silence wasn't tense anymore. It was companionable, but laced with a new, shy awareness. They had survived the press, and the parents. They were veterans of a 24-hour war. When the elevator opened directly into Damien's penthouse in Tribeca, Aria gasped. It was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, polished concrete floors, modern art. But it was also sterile. It looked like a showroom, not a home. "Welcome to HQ," Damien said, dropping his keys in a bowl. He loosened his tie, looking relieved to be out of the ancestral home. "I'm starving. All I had at the wedding was champagne and spite." Aria laughed. "Spite is very filling, but I could eat." "Pizza? God, yes." 40 minutes later, the billion-dollar facade was completely gone. Damien Hale, wearing sweatpants and a vintage t-shirt, sat on the floor of his living room with Aria. A box of greasy pepperoni pizza sat between them. "So," Damien said, picking up a slice, "you mentioned you're an architect. Why were you working at a coffee shop?" Aria wiped tomato sauce from her lip. "I have a degree in interior architecture. I graduated top of my class, but the industry is insular. I didn't have the connections. I didn't have a name. I spent 2 years interning for free. Then Mason happened. He convinced me to focus on his career, to help him network. He said my turn would come." She scoffed. "Turns out, my turn was just being his cheerleader." She looked around the penthouse. "This space, for example, it's magnificent, but it has no flow. It's cold. You have all this light, but you block it with these heavy, dark furniture pieces. It fights the view instead of framing it." Damien looked at her, then at the room. "I hired a top designer for this." "You hired a minimalist who hates comfort," Aria corrected. "You need warmth, texture. This place says, 'I work here,' not 'I live here.'" Damien put his pizza down. He looked at her with a renewed interest. Not the romantic awe from the boutique, but intellectual respect. "Show me," he said. He handed her his tablet and a stylus. "Fix it." Aria hesitated, then took the tablet. She opened a sketching app. For the next hour, she sketched over a photo of his living room. She explained sight lines, light diffusion, the psychology of space. She was animated, passionate, her hands moving as she spoke. She forgot about the deal, the money, the ex. She was just Aria in her element.